Right now, my signature program, Scribble School, is open for enrollment, but not for long. This is the robust program that will take you from knowing nothing or a little bit about hieroglyphs to reading the common text you're going to actually see in museums, online, and on trips to Egypt. And there's a very special bonus available right now for the first 25 people who sign up by Friday, May 15th. They'll get the special bonus Hieroglyph a Day planner. This planner is not available anywhere else. It's not sold separately. This is the only way to get it. So you'll want to check out all the details and grab your spot in Scribble School at scribbleschool.com. Welcome to Voices of Ancient Egypt, the podcast for people who don't just want to learn about ancient Egypt, but want to understand it on a deeper, more meaningful level. I'm Melinda Nelson-Hurst, an Egyptologist with a PhD in the field and years of experience teaching at the university level, working in Egypt, and training students around the world to read real ancient Egyptian texts. I've spent decades studying this civilization in a traditional academic setting so you don't have to, and so you can access knowledge that's usually locked behind academic walls. This podcast brings ancient Egyptian history, beliefs, and language to life, and shows you that learning hieroglyphs is possible, no matter your age, background, or schedule. So whether you want to read hieroglyphs in museums, on social media, or on your next trip to Egypt, you'll find the tools, stories, and encouragement to make it real right here. Let's hear the voices of the ancient world together. Hello, and welcome back to the Voices of Ancient Egypt podcast. I'm so excited to share this episode with you this week, where I'm going to be diving into a bit of why is this podcast even exist, right? Why did I start this? What is Voices of Ancient Egypt about? And what is it doing here? Why did I bring it into the world? Why do I continue it? And we talked about this a little bit in the last episode where I talked a bit about my story. So if you want to get a longer version of my general story of how I got to be an Egyptologist and how I started this, you can check out that episode. But in this one, we're going to focus on specifically Voices of Ancient Egypt here on the podcast, as well as on other platforms as well. But basically, this got started because after years of teaching and also doing local public outreach, I really wanted to reach more people. I wanted to be able to share the joy of learning about ancient Egypt and the ancient Egyptians with more people, because I saw both in myself, certainly in the past when I didn't have access to this information, and to people that I would meet all over the place, whether it was, every time I was flying on a plane and I was sitting next to somebody and they asked me what I did, when I tell them I'm an Egyptologist, there's usually a variety of responses. It usually has to do either with them loving ancient Egypt or their child loving ancient Egypt or a project they still remember from school that made them really fall in love with ancient Egypt and want to be an Egyptologist for a while, but they've ended up in a different career. Or people I meet every day, people I was teaching in the university setting as well, who maybe felt like they couldn't do this for a career, so they're taking a course or two here and there, but they really wanted to know more. They were really in love with ancient Egypt and wanted more. And so I wanted a way to reach more people, and possibly some of the same people really, but with a wider variety of topics and deeper than I could necessarily reach people with a couple of public talks locally or even university courses. And so I started Voices of Ancient Egypt originally just as a YouTube channel, and I aimed to fill a gap I really saw there. It wasn't just that there wasn't much about ancient Egypt around, although you could definitely say that. But I also found what was there was these two extremes, right? So you had like some beginner material, some of which was very good. Some of it, was really good intro to what ancient Egypt was like and what was society shaped like. A lot of stuff about Tutankhamun, of course, sometimes fairly sensational. So whether it was on the web or TV documentaries or books or whatever, there was a variety of stuff sort of that, although I found a lot of it was really repetitive. It was the same subjects over and over. And actually a lot of websites were clearly copied from each other. They were identical text, exactly the same. So there really was a limit on how much there was of that. And then I found that while there was a bunch of other material out there, that material was all the way at the other end and really written by people with PhDs for people with PhDs. And so it really wasn't accessible. It wasn't the kind of thing that somebody could just pick up and read. You could read it, you'd understand the words, right? But the context of what the heck they were talking about, what does this jargon mean, all of that would not be there if you didn't have years of academic training in the field. So you really just had this big gap, I felt like, in the middle that was, beyond a gap. It was like a canyon between these two things. And so that's what I aim to fill with Voices of Ancient Egypt. And I did that initially through YouTube videos, which I started out basing around the topics I taught at university to supplement what my students were getting from accompanying books that we used and so forth. And I found that this really actually helped a lot with my students, especially for some subjects that aren't necessarily hard to understand, but can be really uninteresting and dry in a textbook. Things like, the basics of the chronology of ancient Egypt, for example. And those work out much better in a engaging video format a lot of times. And that's what I found to be true with this. And then from there, I went into topics that are not so dry, such as the afterlife and so forth. And it was just a way to bring in more of my expertise and my interpretation rather than just that of the textbook. They were getting my interpretation in the classroom, of course, but this was a way to sort of introduce them to the short version of it before class, to lay a little groundwork, and then we'd get into it deeper in the classroom. But by doing this, these videos also reached a whole lot of other people who could not take university classes with me. They don't live in my city. Maybe they don't have access to any Egyptology where they live. You might relate to this. Honestly, so much of the world, there's no access to this, even in very economically developed areas. I live in the United States, and where I live, I am the only Egyptologist for hundreds of miles around. If I were somebody wanting to learn about ancient Egypt living where I do, I wouldn't have any local resources, really, unless there was somebody like me also still here. But, in those hundreds of miles around me, there's nobody there either. It's really kind of few and far between in a lot of places. There are a couple places in the world where there's a higher concentration, of course, but for most of us, there's not a lot available locally. So I really wanted these videos to be able to help fill that gap for other people. But it just helped to get it off the ground for me to be able to link it with the local teaching I was doing at the time. Now, from there, I grew out from there and continued to go into other topics and started to talk to a bunch of people who had started following me through my YouTube channel and social media outlets, and just trying to get to know them and their stories better and what interested them and what they'd struggled with. And I found out from a lot of them that really what they really wanted help with was learning hieroglyphs. And that's when I shifted largely to focusing a lot on hieroglyphs on the YouTube channel. And then from there, I wanted to create a path for learning hieroglyphs that was deeper, and one that really didn't exist when I was obsessed with ancient Egypt and wanted to learn this. And the only way at the time was graduate school. And if you want to hear about that and how I ended up in graduate school, you can listen to the previous episode. But this was just not available at all when I was looking for it. And I wanted to make it available for everybody out there who wanted to learn hieroglyphs. And so that's why I turned largely to that topic, because I found that the majority of people who I talked to, that's what they really, really needed. And now I've helped well over 200 students with my programs, and my YouTube channel has over 1 million views, which is amazing. I'm not even sure what it's up to now. They informed me that I hit the 1 million view mark like a year and a half ago or something like that. So I'm not sure exactly what it's up to at this point. It could be a lot more, but it's definitely over 1 million. And of course, thousands of people on social media as well. And this mission is to bring the voices of ancient Egypt, like literally the ancient Egyptians' voices, that's why I named it that, into the modern world in a way that is accessible, fun, and it also fits into our busy lives. Because let's face it, the vast majority of us out there don't have time to go back to graduate school and get a degree, and maybe we don't even want to, or there's also the cost that could be tens and tens of thousands of dollars per year, for example, depending on exactly how you pursue it. And so this podcast here is a new way to further this mission and bringing understanding of ancient Egypt and the ancient Egyptians to everyone who loves ancient Egypt. Because I want you to be able to find your joy in learning about ancient Egypt and hieroglyphs. And that's not just because I think ancient Egypt is really cool, although there's no denying that it is, right? You wouldn't be here if it wasn't. And I definitely would agree with that. I'm not going to argue on that point. But I do it because in addition to that, I do love it and it's so cool. I love talking about it. But in addition to that, I really feel that we all need joy in our lives right now. And we need that joy that we get through hobbies and passions that we have in our life. And in fact, studies have even shown how spending time on hobbies can improve your health. So I want you to be able to find that joy and do so just like the people that I've reached so far and the students I've worked with more closely, such as my student Carrie Ann. She told me that her life, once she learned hieroglyphs, her life was so much more exciting because she would be able to see hieroglyphs online and in books and be able to read them. She even had a chance, there's not a lot of Egyptology in her area, but she had a chance to visit a museum when there was a visiting exhibition and brought her family with her to this local museum and was able to read the hieroglyphs to them there. She said that she had a smile from ear to ear. This is how she described it to me at the time, with getting to use her language skills and share that passion with her family. And this is something that I think that everybody should be able to get a chance to do. And maybe even your family's not that into it, but you have friends who are, or you can make new friends through this community, through meeting other people who are into ancient Egypt, and be able to not only learn for yourself, but share it with others as well. Or maybe you want to travel. Some of my students stay home and they just want to go to the local museum, or they see stuff online like Carrie Ann did also, or in books. And others of my students love to travel, and some of them go to Egypt, some of them go to other places and then see Egyptian objects there in museums or on display. So like, for example, my student Juan, who said that it was one of the best things about going to Egypt was actually being able to read the hieroglyphic text that he encountered there when he was traveling. And he wrote to me after he went on a trip, and he told me he couldn't wait to go back and use his skills again. Or like Steve, who told me he actually just coincidentally was headed to Rome right after he'd been learning hieroglyphs with me. And he, if you've never seen this before, by the way, in Rome, there's actually more standing Egyptian obelisks in Rome than in Egypt. So he went to Rome, not specifically for that, but while he was there, he saw the Egyptian obelisks, and he said that he was actually reading the hieroglyphs on them. And this was hilarious, I thought, when Steve shared this, because he said that everybody around him thought he was a genius because he was reading the hieroglyphs on the obelisks there. And then I have other students who not just travel, but might even do this sort of work as they're living. So I have one student who actually is a tour guide who goes to various places around the world and has been to Egypt many, many times. And he told me he'd been to the Luxor Museum many times, but had never been able to recognize more than a few hieroglyphic signs. And then once he'd been studying hieroglyphs with me, he said he went back to Luxor, and he said, I surprised myself with how much that I had learned, and it was so amazing to walk into the museum this next time. He said, quote, what previously seemed so complex and out of reach was finally decipherable. Words can't begin to describe the feeling to walk into the cachette room at the museum in Luxor and flawlessly read the text inscribed on the Hathor statue like it was the newspaper. I surprised myself, he said. And this is what I want you to be able to experience. And this is why this podcast exists, not just for hieroglyphs, those are hieroglyph examples, but also to learn more widely about the ancient Egyptians and bring you actual the real story from ancient Egyptians themselves. So you'll notice this is called Voices of Ancient Egypt. That was a very intentional choice. When I first started, I actually started the YouTube channel under a different name because I wasn't sure in the beginning exactly what direction I was going to go in. And I had a more general sort of ancient name. But I changed it very early on to Voices of Ancient Egypt because I realized that this was really the focus, and this is what I wanted to be able to bring into this modern world, was the ancient Egyptians' words themselves from the original texts, but also their voices in a slightly less direct way from other evidence. So the archaeological remains that they leave for us, for example, such as in-house sites and, of course, burial sites that we're all familiar with, temples, things that show up in the art and architecture. All of this is sort of a piece of what the ancient Egyptians have left behind for us that speaks to us today and tells us about who these people were, what they did, what they believed in, what they felt, what their motivations were, what they wanted out of life, how they felt about each other, all of those things. And I love being able to learn about that myself, and I love being able to share it with those of you who love ancient Egypt just as much as I do. And so this podcast is here to do exactly that and bring what's been missing out there to help you tap into that passion for ancient Egypt by featuring a mix of different types of episodes. So there'll be solo episodes from me, like this one, talking about various topics. This could be everything from how to learn hieroglyphs to specific things about hieroglyphs to ancient Egyptian thoughts and beliefs, for example, or things that they wrote about in particular texts or rituals that they held, for example, topics like that, as well as also things possibly about my experiences in Egypt as well. So there could be all kinds of topics, and I'm sure other things will come up along the way that I haven't thought of yet. We might get into discussions of particular books that have come out, or maybe particular sites in Egypt that interest you all. And then I may have episodes in the future with some special guests as well, possibly other Egyptologists. I'm sort of just starting to work on that, as well as definitely interviews with people like you who love ancient Egypt, talking about how they've pursued their passions and done things like succeeded with learning hieroglyphs. So definitely be episodes coming up with some of my students, like the people I mentioned earlier, so they can talk about how they pursued their passion, how did they go about it, and what was actually useful for them when they were learning hieroglyphs, like what sort of strategies and techniques did they use that worked and really got them those results so they could read the texts that they see in museums or in books or on social media. So I can't wait to share those episodes with you soon. And this is a brand new podcast, of course, and I'd love it if you are enjoying this. I would love it if you would subscribe so you don't miss any of the future episodes, and share this podcast with any of your fellow Egyptophiles, anybody you know who's got that passion for ancient Egypt like you. Please do share it with them. That's how I can reach more people and make more episodes. And of course, I'd love it if you would leave a rating and review in whatever podcast player you use, such as Apple Podcasts, for example. This absolutely helps the podcast go out to more people. And the more we grow, the more content I can create for you and keep this love of ancient Egypt flowing and this knowledge flowing. And I can't wait to bring you more episodes about a whole bunch of different topics about ancient Egyptians and what their lives were like. And I thank you so much for listening and can't wait to see you in the next episode.